Hey, today, Pastor Jake Reeves and Pastor Rick George are joining us today to talk about stewardship and follow up on the Sunday morning message, and we get to find out exactly how much Pastor Jake loves lunch. Welcome to the 167. Hey, welcome back to the 167. I'm here with Pastor Jake Reeves.
Good morrow to you, sir.
And Pastor Rick George.
Hey, what's up?
I am Pastor Lucas Motley, and we are here to talk a little bit about what happened on Sunday. We're finishing up our series on How to Christian.
Yep, we got this past week was week 4, and then we've got this week is week 5, and we will be done. And like I said, I'm going to miss good old Skip Kindly. How about you?
Skip Kindly.
Skip, man.
Didn't Skip a good dude?
That mustache, man.
He needs paid at least, 3.
Well, we're making headway. We're
a
making
bonus.
headway. There has been kind of an uprising of support to try to hire Skip, and so the elders are getting some pressure to say, "Come on, we
There's a
need to make it happen."
GoFundMe, and
We got a GoFundMe going.
I'm not gonna lie. I was a little disappointed on the shorts length. I mean, I think they could have gone shorter.
I think that's Skip's Baptist upbringing there.
They go past his fingertips.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, this week what we were talking about, because How to Christian's been a very practical series. It's been about what are the nuts and bolts. Like instead of just we're just talking. Usually it's about our identity or what we're being, but this is about what we're doing.
Right.
And this week was, I mean, honestly, it sparked a lot of conversations at home for us as well. But it was on budgeting and stewardship.
Yeah, so stewardship, that's a term that not many people are common. It's not a common term. Mm-hmm. They're not familiar with. We don't use that unless you're part of a union, and then you have a union steward. But other than that, we're just not familiar with it. So manager, though, if you think in terms of management, well, that's a whole nother idea. So this idea of stewardship is really about the management of resources that don't belong to you. They belong to someone else. You're just taking care of them. And so to have that mindset of management of everything that I have, not just my money, but I'm responsible to be a good manager of everything. That applies to everyone at every level of their life.
There's actually a really interesting explanation of that and kind of a metaphor, whatever parable of that. In The Lord of the Rings, it's too bad you've never seen The Lord of the Rings, Stewards of Gondor.
And that's exactly where my brain went. Which
of Gondor.
I mean, because like you said, you don't use the word. Are you a steward of this gentleman's property? But the steward of Gondor is exactly. So
there you go.
If you haven't seen The Lord of the Rings,
It's in the 3rd movie, so you may have to endure 10 hours of film before you get to this particular metaphor, but it'll be worth it in the end.
All for the metaphor. It's worth it.
So are we going to spend this podcast talking about all the reasons Pastor Rick should watch Lord of the Rings? Or
That's a
Here
bonus.
we go.
That's a bonus episode.
Bonus episode.
Number 1. All right. We've talked about the parable of the steward. We talked about the 3 stewards that have talents. We talked about some of that stuff. I do want to make this a little bit personal as we're getting into this, because we're talking about How to Christian. I want to know, and I'll go first so you guys have time to think about a lie to tell. But what do you guys do at home? Do you use a particular software? Do you guys have a budget? How do you kind of do that? So I'll kind of go first. You guys can kind of formulate that. But what my wife and I have been through financial peace. I've taught that before. I grew up with that, with the different envelopes that you kind of put stuff in. Mm-hmm. But we are a cashless family in reality. Actually, we pay our kids for chores in cash so they have a good sense of working. But so we actually use the envelope method, but we have different bank accounts. So when I get paid, We have a savings account for each one of our kids. We have some annuities, some things like that they get paid into. And so as soon as I get paid, it's like transfer. And it's just like, and you basically get down to what's in my checking account is our food budget and our entertainment budget, and everything else is kind of separated out into those things. And Krista does a similar thing. We split the bills actually in half. And so she's paying half, I'm paying half, and then we just live on what's left. So we don't have I can only spend $5 today for lunch budget, but it's like we take care of all the big, if you imagine that jar with the big rocks in it, like we take care of all the big rocks, and then it's like now we have some fungible money about what to do with it.
Yeah. How about you?
So Sarah and I, we are Financial Peace University graduates as well, big advocates of that. In fact, we did that back in Manhattan, and it was life-changing for us. I mean, we didn't have a lot of debt. I've always been a saver, so that was good. But Sarah's a spender, and so when we got married, we kind of ended up canceling each other out. And so trying to get us on the same page so that way we could build up those emergency funds and stuff was really helpful. And so our day-to-day, we used every dollar for a really long time. And then we switched banks, and every dollar didn't have integration with the bank we were at. So we switched over to Mint.
Yep. It's a good one
so
also.
Mint, it's a little more in depth, but which is nice. You can get in that. So we use Mint, and it's the same thing. We kind of have a budget on there. We're pretty much cashless as well, but we
Explain a little bit. Mint is it's an app and a website.
Yeah, mint.com, I believe, is where you can find that.
So it's an app and a website that it ties in with our bank. It shows where everything is spent. Now every month that I tithe, it says that my tithe is groceries or restaurants or something, so I have to reallocate it. But it is really helpful because it lets especially when you first start out, you kind of get that sick feeling of like, oh, I spend this much money here or something.
I was roommates with a guy that we both went on mint.com at one point to try and get a hold of our finances because we were just single guys. We didn't care.
Yeah.
And so we got on there, and usually there's it's a pie chart. So there's like a piece of the pie that says fast food.
Yeah.
Like that's, this is how much money of your money that you spend on fast food. He had an actual category for McDonald's. Like he had a fast food category, and then McDonald's had its own
I thought you were going to have a
category.
Wendy's one, and I was like, I believe that, Lucas.
Yeah,
I believe
I probably should have.
Yeah, for Trudy and I, so as you get older, you get a little more discretionary spending. It's not going so much on the, taking care of kids and all those. Now you have grandkids and all those kinds of things. But so we aren't as tightly tied to a budget as we have been in the past. We still have a budget. And the way we budget is we look out over the course of the year, and we know what are some of the things that are coming up that we know we have to take care of throughout the year, and then we set money aside to take care of those things. So like car taxes and tags, we budget money every month. So when that comes due for us in May, it's there. Christmas. And the way we do it, so you say you're cashless. We are not cashless. So we have monies that we're getting more and more cashless. It's just ease. But we have cash that we set aside, and we know we have this much each week or each month to eat out. We don't have a McDonald's, or it's an eating out budget.
Right.
Culver's.
Culver's budget.
You don't need a budget for Culver's. It's just Scoopies and everything. This episode brought to you by.
But it does help us stay on track. And the way, so Trudy, she graduated college with a degree in business education. That's kind of her wheelhouse. So she's always kind of taken care of the budgeting and all that for our family, and she's done a great job of it. And her method might be confusing to some people, but it makes sense to her. So instead of having different accounts, she would write, each month, like for the Christmas account, she would actually write a check for $100 or whatever for that month for Christmas, and then write void on the check, take it out, put it in an envelope, whatever. So then she would know this is how much money we have available. It's in the same account. So if you looked at our register, it would look like we had less money than we actually had.
Right.
But she knew this money is designated for this amount.
Right. So you have a larger account. It's accruing more interest. but you've taken the checkbook to kind of say, no, we have.
Yeah, and so budgeting is an important part of life, whether it's a financial budget, the time budget I talked about, budgeting, every aspect of our life. It's important because when you get things down on paper, that budget just reflects your values, right? So the flow of money in your family represents the value system under which your family operates. The flow of money in my family reflects the value system that we operate in, and that value system is going to be a little different from family to family. You're going to value certain things a little more than others, but at the end of the day, you can look at it. And the thing I like about everydollar.com is when you put in your numbers, it gives you the percentage of your overall budget that's going towards that.
Right.
So you can tell just at a glance, am I tithing 10%, 11%, 8%? It'll tell you how much of my budget percentage-wise is going towards food or my auto or whatever. And you can quickly at a glance see the percentage and say, oh, that's not a reflection of what we say we value, and then you can make those changes on paper, and then you get to live it out that next month.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that you, in your sermon, you said, I think that is incredibly convicting, and it's worth that checkup to say, because there's how many times are people out there going, man, our family, we're just all about this. Our family's absolutely about this thing, and then it's like you look at your checkbook and you're like, and it's not even, it's not malicious. It's just, we don't think about it. People go, oh yeah, we're all about that. And you check the account and that's a very small percentage of your time and money. And then it prompts that question of, that's fine, but maybe not say that maybe as a family, you're like, maybe that's not what we're
Here,
about.
let me take it to an HNO, like I talked about.
Right.
So here's a personal question for you. How uncomfortable would you be to take your physical budget and show it to another person and say, here's my budget, what do you think? How, like on a comfort level?
Which is one uncomfortable or is one comfortable?
One is terribly uncomfortable. 10 is I'm extremely
But
comfortable.
like I posted on the internet.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably be like,
Don't say 5. No.
No.
Okay.
I was like, I'm probably like a 6 or 7.
So you'd be pretty comfortable.
Like I'd be pretty comfortable, I know what people are going to hit me on. They're going to hit me on my lunch budget. They're going to hit me on my lunch budget.
Same.
But other than that, as far as where our money actually goes, and how we have it budgeted, I feel very,
But it reflects the value that you place on lunch.
Yeah.
It's not a judgment. It's just, this is what I value.
I love lunch.
It is true. I do love lunch.
No, I'd be fairly comfortable with it. Probably like 6, 7. We'll go 7.5. I'll tell you the thing that always makes me nervous is like, as a pastor, like I said, people are, and so like that's always the thing is I feel very comfortable with how we're managing our money. That's just my own thing. I'm always very self-conscious about, like, we bought a new van. What was that, a year ago?
Yeah,
like
something like
2
that,
years
yeah.
ago. And it's like, it's not, but it's a Pacifica. I think it's like a 2019 Pacifica. And it was like, oh my gosh, like we have like the nicest van, and it's not even really like, it doesn't have the DVD player and stuff like that, but like it has leather interior. And I'm always going, do people think my minivan is too nice? And so
I mean, the gold inlays were a nice touch.
Yeah.
I thought so. Like the initials that I have painted, the custom paint job. No, but I mean, that's my own insecurity, and I think that's because my dad was a pastor as well, and we grew up with almost nothing. I mean, like we grew up very modestly, and so I'm always self-conscious about the total amount of money, but I'm very comfortable with how we manage it and how our generosity piece. And
and I think it's important though for everyone on podcast that was here on Sunday, whoever you are. It's important to keep in mind that budgeting and management and stewardship isn't just about money. It's about resources, every resource, your time, your gifts, your talents, your passions, your money, everything, your kids. You are responsible to manage everything that God has given you. So don't pigeonhole and say, well, I'm just not good at this. And no, it's a whole thing.
But people do that. They section off, especially like people's homes. It's like because people say, well, how can I use my home? Well, I don't know. Can you, put up somebody in a guest bedroom that needs help?
Right.
Can you host a life group? Can you, be the person in your community who, your soccer team needs a place to, have their end of the year party. And it's like, well, come use our home, because it establishes that with other kids. Like, that's something that's very important to Chris and I. Is when I grew up, my mom made sure that our home was the home that my friends felt safe in, that they wanted to go to, that they knew that they, their parents knew that nothing bad was going to happen to them. They weren't going to be drinking. They weren't, like, nothing shady was going to go on at our home. And so, she used our home as a kind of beacon for our friends.
Yeah. And so, as we, kind of reflect back on the message from Sunday, the thing that really stood out to me as I began to research and prepare for the message was that passage in 1 Timothy chapter 6, when the Apostle Paul is instructing this young man, a pastor, and he says, encourage everyone, to obey these teachings. These are good. And these teachings, not everybody is going to be on board with them, but he says, these teachings promote a godly life. And management or stewardship really is about a godly life. It's not about a selfish life. When you begin to manage well the resources that God has blessed you with, then it reflects a godly life. When you manage poorly, like, it reflects a selfish life, right? Yeah. And so he says, it's going to promote a godly life. And then the part that really jumped out is he said, tell those who are rich in this world not to trust in their money, but to use their money to do good, right? To be a blessing to other people. And what stood out to me there, and what got me going on this rabbit trail for a while, is when he said, tell those who are rich in this world. And then I realized nobody thinks they're rich.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter how much money, and again, through the research, there was just a small percentage, about 1% of even the wealthiest people, like, oh, I'm not really rich, because I know rich people. So we have a tendency to compare ourselves to people who are a little further up the ladder, have a little more money, have a few more things, a bigger house, a nicer car. And we look at those things, and then that's how we evaluate our wealth or how rich we are. Yeah. And we always pick people that are, have this house or this car or this salary. And we say, see, we're not rich, they are.
Or even speaking of what you were saying earlier about remembering, like, this isn't even just money. This is, you may be rich in time, like, here's looking at you, 20-year-olds with no kids or empty nesters. Like, and so to have that responsibility with whatever the resource is.
Exactly. So now I got a little more time. I didn't used to have time. Now I do.
You might be broke at 20.
Yeah. So invest that time.
Well, and how many times have we been sitting around looking for a high capacity volunteer, somebody with more bandwidth, and our go-to is, I don't know, are there stay-at-home moms that their kids are in school? What are you doing with that time? And I'm saying, like, they're probably grocery shopping and cleaning the house. I mean, like, they're doing stuff for their family, and I'm going, but is there some time in there? Is there some margin that you could volunteer at home? Is there something you could do? Like I said, I think that, people don't really realize that, because, and I think that is something that you just said, that, like, when you said, I was like, oh my gosh, I want you to say that again, because what you're saying is that lack of a plan is selfishness.
Right.
And it's like, I think about the people in my life where it's like, if somebody shows up and I'm like, hey, what are we doing? And they're like, I don't know, I don't have a plan. I'm going, man, I took time away to come help you, or come to, help you. And you don't have a plan. Like, you're not organized. And there's such this selfishness about going, I don't care. Everybody's just going to revolve around me, and it's fine. I don't need to put out any effort. And I had never thought about that before, about that poor stewardship, like, just the lack of a plan to budget is selfish.
Yeah. And it's a reflection of how much we just think about us. Like, that's the selfishness. I'm just thinking about me. I'm not thinking about how my life can impact someone else, how my gifts can impact somebody else, how my resources, it's just me.
Right. Well, and I think about, like that planning and stuff like that, because the second point of your message was about having an open hand. And you've talked about, Trudy's talked about this before. She talked about how she walks through her life with her hands out, with kind of her palms upraised, going, Lord, what do you want me to do? And open hands. So I do think that budgeting affects that. Like you talked a little bit about this in your message, about how pre-planning helps you have open hands.
Right. So again, I say this not in boasting about what we do, but just as a reference point.
Something
So,
instructional.
yeah. So there have been numerous times throughout our life, whether we had a lot of income or little income in comparison to other, like it didn't really matter, but we have been purposeful in planning to be able to bless other people. And sometimes that's been in just preparing a meal for them. Sometimes that has meant we would like to have a new vehicle. This person needs a vehicle. We will take what we're currently driving and just give it to them, and then we'll go buy something else. And when I've shared with people that we've given away 3 or 4 vehicles to people, it makes it sound like we're giving away, 2021 Mercedes,
A brand new
SEL.
car.
No, in perspective, it's a nice car for like it runs. It's good. So we're not going out and giving away, $30,000-$40,000 vehicles. But it's a vehicle that is worthwhile to us. We're like, we could trade it in and get some value, or we could just use it to bless somebody else. Now, the reason we're able to do that is because we budget for a new car, and we put money aside every month to replenish the car that we're currently driving. So we make a payment to ourselves, in essence. So we have a car fund that's there. And then if we're going to give this car away, we can't factor that price into the car that we're going to buy. So we have to take that out and say, well, now we can't get this car. We're going to have to get this car, but we're going to bless that person. So again, it's a value system. We get to weigh our values and which is more important, driving this nicer car or blessing this person.
Yeah.
So it's planning.
Well, and I think that is something that was convicting me as we talked about this. And I want to kind of get your perspective on this because, you've talked about how you're more and more cashless. Like we're pretty much cashless except for we pay our girls in chores because we make them section out. We do the 10-10-10-70 thing with their chores. So we make them count out change and put it in different banks. But like we were on vacation this past week and we were in downtown Cincinnati. I was getting my kids some ice cream at an ice cream shop there. And a woman walked up to us and said, can you help me? Like I need, and it was just like, I literally looked at her, I was like, I don't have any cash. Like I don't carry cash. I don't.
Can I Venmo you some?
Yeah. Do you have a cell phone? Can I Venmo you? Can I, and so it's one of those moments where that is something that's convicting for me is I think that the less access I have,
Right.
or the poor planning at maybe for me for not carrying cash, it can affect my open-handedness. Like, I don't know if you've encountered that or if you guys, if you have thought of a way around that.
Oh, no. I mean, I think that's the thing is you see, the gradient, as I'm the youngest one in this conversation and I'm still square in the millennial. But you get like Pastor Cam, he's right on the millennial Gen Z edge. And I think you're going to see people even moving from becoming cardless, working more Apple Pay and
they're not going to physically carry around Dogecoins.
Well, and I think I don't know that you're necessarily going to see, I don't think that trend's going to back up on itself.
But again, it's planning. You have to be intentional. So just this past Monday night in our men's Bible study, someone came up to me and they said, I loved what you said about being intentional, about looking for people to bless. So I went and I took out $100 and put it in my pocket. Right? So they don't normally carry cash, but they were intentional. They thought it through. They planned ahead. And they're like, I'm going to get this money, not so I can buy ice cream, but in case somebody needs help, I'll have it and I can bless them with it.
Like that's my blessing money.
So maybe that $100 is the only cash that you have and it's folded up and it's stuck in that little private compartment of your wallet and you just know it's there, but you planned for it.
And I have a friend that what he actually did was he went and got, I can't remember if it was just like a cash gift card. You know, like you can get like those Visa gift cards.
Yeah.
Or it was, I think he might have actually carried some different ones where it was like Subway or,
Right.
and so like when somebody actually said like, oh, can I have some money for food? He was like, I don't have cash, but
Here's a gift card to Subway.
yeah, here's
Yeah.
a $20 gift card to Subway. You can eat on that for a couple of meals.
Right.
No, but I am calling, like you do, like I agree, you need to be intentional with that. But I'm calling in 20 years that even the homeless,
We'll be like Venmo me.
no, there'll be some method
Yeah.
that will be so pervasive that then all the excuses are gone.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, like I think you have that. That's not a good excuse right now. You have to be intentional with it.
We're
but-
missing an opportunity now. Somebody needs to start a company where homeless people can register in the company and then they take it. I mean, it's basically.
I mean,
Venmo.
well, yeah, but it would just not surprise me.
But what about your
So-
time? So you have to
Yeah,
budget
yeah.
time as well. So if you don't budget 30 minutes or an hour in your day to help people, you're not going to have time to help them. Right? If you don't budget some time to spend with God, you're probably not going to spend that time with God because we're all busy. And it seems like everybody has a shortage of time, but we all have the same amount of time. Right? So you have to be intentional. You have to plan.
Yep.
You have to think, this is what is important. These are the values that I say I have. Now my time budget is going to match up to what I say I value.
It's the power of no. I mean, it's the hardest thing to say no to some pretty awesome opportunities out there because you want to, where you might have said, you know, maybe it's every, no matter what day I pick, someone's gonna be like, well, why aren't you doing, you know, every Tuesday, I'm like, we're not going to do anything. But that doesn't mean, oh, I'm staying at home and being a recluse. It means that's always open. So that way, when I have a chance to invite somebody over to my house or when I have a chance to do something, it's there.
Right. And here's
You know.
what's important in that process of budgeting your time. There have been seasons in Trudy and my life that we have felt guilty when we've sat down to watch television or just unwind. And we shouldn't have, but we did because like we should be doing something. Well, sometimes sitting down and watching TV or just doing nothing is the most important thing you can do. Now, if it's 10, 12 hours a day,
Right.
you know, but if it's, hey, I just need to unplug for a minute and that's healthy for me.
Yeah.
And you do that twice a week, that's budgeting, that's planning ahead,
Yeah.
that's being a good manager of your resources because then it gives you fuel to go out and do other things.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to know what you need and what God is asking you to do, how you're wired, and then budget accordingly.
I mean, look at Jesus Christ. You have God in the flesh who has, you know, every angel at his disposal ever, and he still keeps a rhythm. He still
He's like, you guys want to go get lunch?
I really value lunch. Disciples, come with me.
Yes.
Which he did. Value
Exactly.
food a lot.
He did.
So
Boom.
it is
There's your-
biblical, and I am not ashamed of it being in my
It's
budget.
a long way around to rationalize Jake's lunch budget.
because Jesus Christ said
I didn't
so.
even think about that. I was just like, no, Jesus loved to eat. And then, yeah, that's true.
He
No,
also was able to take very little.
Well, that's
But I think that is like, I think those are the three things. It's like, here's what I know that I have to do with work. But like one of the things that I've kind of tried to get in the habit of is I'm like asking Carissa, what are the nights that I can be gone? And that doesn't mean that like it's automatically filled, but it's like, okay, Monday and Tuesday nights are the most convenient nights for me to have meetings because I have meetings with life group leaders. And so I know that when somebody texts me and says, can we meet? I'm like, Monday, Tuesday night. You know, it's like, that's what I've got. And then if it's like, well, I can't make Monday, Tuesday night, then I've got to go back and go, okay, can we fudge some things around? But I think it's also important that it's like, you know, I try as much as possible, but I mean like Saturdays, it's like, no, this is time that it's like, no, I'm going to go to my kid's soccer game. I'm going to play with my kids. I'm going to spend time with my family. And that is protected time.
right. So the main point, okay, if you pull back and look, well, what was the point of the message? The point of the message is if you want to live a godly life, a life that honors God and glorifies Him, you have to be intentional. You can't just be lazy and wing it, whether it's with your money, your time, your kids, your career, whatever. You have to be intentional. The way that you go about that is called management or stewardship. And so you manage all of those things in a way that honors God, and if you do that, it will lead to a godly life.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, thanks guys for being here.
Yep.
We'll see you guys next time on the 167. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Think Different in the podcast. It's a segment where we like to take things that you may have thought traditionally one way and kind of take a different look at a different perspective at them. And so we've been talking the last like 6 sessions. This is the 7th session that we've done on Job, and just talking about how most people kind of incite Job to say, you know, this is why God allows suffering, and this is why Christians are allowed to suffer, and it's because God punishes us, or it's not. And really, that's not really the case at all. And so we've been talking about kind of the beginning of this, and it's all structured as kind of a Hebrew Shakespearean play. But like I said, we talked last week about why I think that it is actual, that it actually happened, because there's so much knowledge in when God shows up and answers for himself, that he drops so much knowledge that people could not have known back then without modern technology, that I believe that it's absolutely 100% true, that somebody did write it as a play, but it was to document something that really happened. And so the play opens with the accuser, Satan, who's kind of the prosecution, and he's prosecuting not only individual people, but humanity, and telling God that the only reason that humanity likes God is when good things happen to him. And then God says, no, I bet not. Look at my boy Job. He's righteous in my sight. He's going to be great. And the prosecution says, all right, well, let me at him. Let me cross-examine him. And so he goes through and he kills all 7 of his children. He takes everything that he owns. His wife says, curse God and die. He's got 3 friends that show up and tell him that he's the problem. God's punishing you because you have some secret sin in your life. And Job's rebuttal is, I don't have secret sin in my life. The problem's not with me. The problem's with God. And so then I wish God would show up and answer for himself. And then you have Elihu, who's one of his friends, that shows up and says, maybe it doesn't have to be either or. Maybe God is just, and maybe you're not being punished. Maybe God is doing something else, which happens to be true, but it's also a little bit short-sighted. And so then God himself shows up to Job, and this is what we talked about last week, and he looks at Job and he says, who are you to question me? And this is the thing that is so hard to talk to people about when they're in that moment where something bad has happened to them, and they're questioning and saying, why would God allow this to happen? Somebody they know is involved in a drunk driving accident, and they say, man, why would a good God allow this to happen? And if you think about it, if you really think a deep thought about it and you really examine it kind of dispassionately, it's kind of ridiculous. But that's a hard thing to think about in that time. And that's why it is so important to have these conversations kind of outside that, so you can be prepared to go into that situation. But it's so hard to talk to somebody who's grieving. It's more important in that moment to not rebut them, but to just let them process their grief and then go to these studies. Because the true nature of that question is there some kind of level of Christianity where you get to be put in a bubble where not only you, but nobody that you know suffers because God thinks that you're just the cat's pajamas? Like, you are so righteous that you just escape all suffering in this earth, that nobody will ever, like a mugger who is pursuing sin, like he won't be able to mug you because you are protected by this bubble. And that's just not how the world works. And so God shows up himself finally and tells Job, in a whirlwind of all things, a tornado drops, and he says, hey man, who are you to question me? I am doing something and I don't have to explain myself to you. And that is the hard truth about all of this, is when we say, why would God allow suffering in this world? Why would God allow things like that to happen? You know, it's not that God causes those things to happen to you, because we discussed he wouldn't punish you twice, like he punished Jesus for your sins. So if you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, he's not going to punish you twice for that same sin. But we live in a world where we suffer consequences of our own bad choices. We suffer the consequences of other people's bad choices. And sometimes God allows us to miraculously escape those consequences. And other times he gives us the strength to go through them. And he gives us the ability and all of the spiritual gifts that we need to make it through and to have joy in our lives as we do it. And so God shows up to Job and he starts to tell Job about how he has made the earth in this incredible way. Like I said, read that download, because there's so much modern science in it that we take for granted, that this was written in probably what is the oldest story in the Bible. And like things about constellations and stars and science that you couldn't know if you didn't have high-powered telescopes. That's why I think it's an absolutely true story. And so God tells Job all of these things. And the takeaway from God is that God never answers Job about why he did what he did. So he doesn't tell him, well, like you did a good job. I was betting Satan that you wouldn't like. He doesn't tell him that. He just says, who are you to question me? And that is such a hard thing to hear when we say, why would God allow suffering in this world? I've shared with you before that my wife and I suffered 2 miscarriages, and we say, God, why not these children? And he would just look at us and be able to say, I don't have to answer to you. Like, I just don't. I don't have to. I'm God. It's your job to serve me. It's not my job to serve you. And so in the end, though, of this whole discourse, Job rightly repents. He tells God, I'm sorry for questioning you. You're absolutely right. My job is to be faithful to you no matter what. And then hopefully someday in heaven, I'll understand. But you're absolutely right. You are God. I am not. I don't understand what's happening on. I don't have the knowledge to see all of time at the same time, all injustice all at the same time, and make those judgments about who to save and who not. Like, I just don't have that kind of perspective. And God says, well, that's a wise thing. And God allows Job to repent. And one of the things that God actually tells us in this, which is a good thing to know, is God is happy that Job wanted to speak to him personally. Like his friends are all like, well, we should determine this ourselves. And, it's because God's meant, but God is actually happy that Job wanted God to talk to him directly. And so he commends Job for that. And so God gives him back double of everything that was taken from him. Double. So when he lost 7,000 camels, he gets 14,000 camels back. I can't remember if it was camels or donkeys or whatever it was. He gets double the livestock back that he lost. So he gets double his possessions back. His wife apparently comes back to him and they reconcile because it says that they have 7 more children. And so another really cool fun fact and a different way to look about this is because some people will question, they'll say, well, he got double his camels and double his donkeys, but he only got 7 children. Why didn't he have 14 children? And the reason is because children are not animals. So he still has 7 children. 7 of them are in heaven and 7 of them are on earth. And so he still has 14 children. And so that was a great comfort to me and my wife too, when we say, we have 6 children. We have 2 that are adopted, 2 that are biological, and 2 that are in heaven. And I have 2 children that have never experienced disease or suffering or anything like that. I know that God has them and they're waiting for us. And so God gives back to Job double of everything that he has. He gives him 7 more children. He gives him his wife back. He gives him all of these things back. And so at the end of the close of the story, that's what it is. Job is restored. He never has an answer about why God did that to him, but he's commended and said, this is what you need to do. You need to be faithful no matter what. And so that is a hard thing for us to swallow as Christ followers sometimes. But I think that this story is so much more than just the question of why does God let people suffer? Because that's the thing. If God is so mean, why would he restore Job? If God is so mean, it's like, well, God's so mean to do that to Job. Why give him his stuff back? If God's so mean and he doesn't care about Job, why restore him at all? Just let him die. And then he gets to go to heaven. But he doesn't. God shows him on earth what a blessing is. And he puts his hand of protection back over him. If God is so mean, why would he bother with that? So, and the last thing that, like I said, that we can kind of take from this is what God tells Job, is that in our pain, it is good to go to God. It is good to go to God and say, God, I want to understand this. And that may mean that God comes to you and says, I'm sorry, you don't have the ability to understand this. I'm doing something in the future that you don't understand. I'm strengthening you in a way that you can't comprehend. I'm going to do a good work out of this that's going to be 3, 4, 5 generations down the line. Like, this is going to be okay. And for us to be able to trust God and say, I trust you. I love you. I'm sorry. I repent. And God said, that's okay. Here, let me restore you to who I need you to be. Job is not a great answer to why does God allow suffering. It's not a satisfying answer to us, because the answer is you can't understand it. You need to trust God. God is so much bigger than us, and he loves us, and he's a good and he's a just God, but he's doing some things that we can't comprehend and don't see. And we have to have the ability to trust in faith that God is going to pull us through that. And many of us have stories about the time where we thought that it was the end of our story, and it wasn't. It was the beginning of how God doubly restored us to what was going on. And I know that you might be in that situation right now where you're going through the pain of it, but don't worry, God is going to restore you, and he loves you, and he is a just and loving God. But our idea of fairness and our ideas of justice are not the same as God's ideas of justice and fairness and love. And so we have to trust that God is good and he is justice, and what he does defines those terms. So I hope you guys can see this book differently, and I hope that you guys can see your suffering differently, that it is something that we live with in this world, but that God loves us and he's going to pull us through. See you next time. If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardener.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.